I collect and play a Middle-earth strategy battle game, and over the years I have accumulated a pretty large collection of Lord of the Rings miniatures. My collection means I'm able to field most armies in the game, however the problem is most of these armies are still in boxes. In order to combat my backlog, I've decided that this year I'll be bringing a random army to every tournament I attend. To do this, I'll be using a random picker wheel which I'll spin 3 times. I'll then select one of the choices and that'll be the army that I bring to the tournament. So this event was a 310 points tournament to celebrate the 31st birthday of the TO. So the armies I rolled were Erebor Reclaimed, Depths of Moria, and Defenders of the Hornburg. So with Depths of Moria coming up, I'm probably going to get accused of fixing the role as this is another meta list. But in my defense, if I was going to fix the role, I wouldn't do it for an event that's only worth 70 points. I also originally picked Defenders of the Hornburg as the list, as I thought the Dominant 2 and all of the warriors would be super powerful, and at the time I didn't realise that you can take Depths of Moria with just goblins. I've only ever seen it run with the Balrog, and I assumed you had to take the Balrog as your leader. I guess as we don't have a huge meta in Ireland, we've kind of missed seeing the goblin spam lists, so this will be the first time, so sorry everyone. So onto the list, and there's not really much to this list, it's basically just spam as many goblins as possible. So I'm doing that with 2 Black Shield captains and 1 regular Moria Goblin captain. So what makes this list super strong is that there's a board-wide banner, so those rerolls in combat mean that your 5-point goblins end up outfighting troops that are much better. So from the depths of my collection, I pulled out this box of armoured Moria Goblins, so I think these are some of the coolest sculpts in the game and I wanted to use as many as possible. So for one of them I'd be converting in to be my Moria Goblin captain, and then I would just use the rest to fill out the troop slots. I then grabbed my 2 Black Shield captains out of my Black Shield warband boxes, and the rest of the goblins will be made up using models I've had since I was probably about 12 years old. So with a bit of careful bending I was able to take the guy on the left and make him more captain-like, as you can see here on the right. I would then be placing him on a rock, as everyone knows captains have tactical rocks. So here you can see the full army, it's primed and ready to be painted, and here we have the captain on his tactical rock. I wanted the armour to look dull and weathered, so I started by dry brushing silver over black. I then picked out any cloth areas using red and painted any straps, bows, spear shafts or quivers using brown. So to give the model that dull weathered look, I hit it with an all over wash of a mix of brown and black wash. I then picked out any skin areas using this nice yellow green. I then gave the skin a wash using a Athonian camo shade. So I mixed a few basic materials together to come up with this sort of foresty ground cover mix. I then randomly applied some dirty down moss to make these bases look more realistic. So having mushrooms on the bases has kind of become my signature over the years, so I glued these tiny 3D printed mushrooms to each of the bases. A few years ago I met a Scottish player at an event and he had booked a few extra days to see Belfast. However, he booked the day of the Queen's funeral, which meant that everywhere would be closed. So I had a pre-planned trip to go foraging for mushrooms that day, and I invited this player along with me. So that's how I gained my nickname of the Mushroom Man in the Scottish scene. So by putting tiny mushrooms on all of my bases, I guess I'm living up to being the Mushroom Man. I then hit these mushrooms with a little Tesseract glow through the airbrush, being sure that there was some overspray to give that sort of glowing mushroom effect. So with the rims painted black, that's this army complete, and I have to say I'm really happy with how it looks. I wanted to do something different than the usual grey cave bases that you see on Mario models, and I think these forest bases really pop and look cool. So onto the tournament, and game 1 would be hold ground, and I was up against the Black Gate Opens with a Troll Chieftain, a Mordor Troll and a Scattering of Works. So in this scenario, the objective is to have more models in the middle of the board. So my game plan was pretty simple. So turn 1 I marched to the middle, and the plan was to just body block him out from getting any models into the centre. So my goblins cut through his orcs pretty quickly, and pretty soon we were only left with the 2 trolls. However, these proved pretty difficult to take down, and the continuous hurls and barges from his trolls meant he was able to get the kill on my leader. In the end he did break me, however this caused the game to end on the roll of a 1 or a 2. I had more than triple the amount of models in the centre, therefore I won 18-5. My next game was against Defenders of the Pelennor, and this list consisted of the King of the Dead, the Herald of the Dead, and 9 Warriors of the Dead. The scenario we rolled was Reconnoiter, which was a bit unfair for my opponent as the objective of the game was to get models off the other side of the board, and I had almost 4 times the amount of models that he had. It was pretty clear from the start that this scenario would be unwinnable for my opponent, but we still managed to have a nice game. In the end, I only won 10-5. It was then lunchtime, and it was time to put our armies on display for voting for Best Theme and Best Painted awards. In Game 3, I was against Battle of the Five Armies with Gwahir, Nori, and 7 Iron Hills Dwarves. The scenario was Domination, which involves holding objectives around the board, so this was heavily in my favour as I had vastly superior numbers. In order to win, my opponent would have to kill my leader, break my army, and capture some of the objectives. To prevent the leader kill, I was able to use this weather-top terrain to body block Gwahir from getting anywhere useful for most of the game. In the last turn I was 1 model away from breaking, however a whiff from Gwahir meant my opponent was unable to break me, and I won this game 10-0. In Game 4 I was against Khazad-dûm, and the scenario was Lead from the Front. This scenario involves holding objectives in the middle of the board using heroes, with higher tier heroes capping the objective over lower tier heroes. This game was pretty close, but in the penultimate turn it looked like the dwarves would win. However, a whiff from Martin and his captain in the final turn, with both failing all of their fate, meant I was able to win 18-5. I think it was my opponent's bad luck that won me this game, rather than any skill from my half. We were then into the final game on the top table, and I was against Lurtz's scouts in Lords of Battle. In this scenario, you score by doing wounds to your opponent's army, so this wasn't a great matchup for me as I had over twice the available wounds on the board as my opponent. In order to win, I would have to flash kill his army before he had a chance to get ahead of me on the scoreboard. We deployed our warbands facing each other, and I counter-deployed with my 3rd warband for a flanking manoeuvre. Once trapped between my warbands, I was able to clean up the Uruks pretty quick, with the only survivor being Lurtz. In the end, I won this game 10-0. So on to the awards, and I'm pretty happy to have picked up Best Painted. I think this was mostly due to my bases with the glowy mushrooms rather than the actual painting of the goblins themselves, but I'm still happy with the win. Then on to the podium, and in 3rd place was Peter with his Battle of the Five Armies list. In 2nd place with his Khazad-dûm and his first ever podium was Callum. And in 1st place was myself. So I've been making these trophies for this scene for over 2 years now, and I've never actually won one myself, so I'm super happy to have won one. So I really enjoyed painting this army, especially as I've had some of these models for over 20 years. However, I do think the army is a little bit boring, and the board-wide rerolls are a little bit broken.